Hello, welcome. Okay, I am Marshall England with FortifyData. I head up the marketing team. I will act as your moderator and facilitate questions that you might have during today's spotlight demo on FortifyData's third-party risk management capabilities. Eric, I will turn it over to you if you want to start sharing your screen and orient people to our third-party risk management capability.
All right. Well, once again, thank you all of the attendees for taking time out of your schedule to join with us. My name is Eric Smith. I head up the technical services department here at FortifyData, and I assist the sales team with the sales engineering, and I'm kind of a product guru. So let's kind of outline things very quickly. FortifyData, of course, has a number of modules. We do attack surface monitoring. We do typical GRC functions, risk and compliance, incident management, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's say that you've got most of those things potentially covered or in progress of covering, okay? But what are threat actors up to these days? Are they trying to bash down your front door and get into your systems and steal your data the old-fashioned way? Well, they still are. That's not something you can ignore. But a lot of them are pivoting to attacking your vendors instead, because typically your vendors tend to be less secured than, say, some of the flagship companies might be. And these vendors have access to either sensitive data on you, your company, or access to sensitive systems, or a little bit of both. So making sure that particular attack vector is covered is very, very important. And that's why we're seeing and have been seeing a lot of interest in third-party risk management. So the way people have traditionally done third-party risk management is pretty old-fashioned, and that is, well, you issue a questionnaire to someone and they respond with some answers that you assume are correct and honest, and then you make decisions on what kind of risk this vendor poses to you based on that. The shortcomings of that should be very obvious. So let's talk a little bit about how FortifyData helps in that respect. First off, if you're familiar with our product already in any way, you know that when we assess a company, we're very thorough about it, especially when we're talking about those of you who are clients and we're already doing an attack surface analysis on you. Well, it's worth saying that we treat all companies in our platform identically. So when we're analyzing a third party, we do the exact same type of analysis on them that we're already doing on you. Same level of detail. There is literally no difference, okay? So we're checking everything that they have. We footprint them. We go through all their domains. We scan all their assets. We collate all their vulnerabilities. And then we calculate the risk based on all that data. So let's start talking about where all that shows up in the platform and how you can make best use of it. So if you've ever seen or are familiar with the third-party risk management dashboard, or if you're not, this is the third-party risk management dashboard. And like all dashboards, it's designed to give you the high-level details across all of your third parties simultaneously. It's pretty straightforward. We break all of them into scoring bands so you can see where the majority of your vendors fall. You can see their performance on a heat map and drill down and see, hey, which of my vendors are below the thresholds that I've set I need to be concerned about, or which ones are above threshold and doing very, very well for that example, okay? And then down below, you have a customizable tile-based interface where you can add and remove different tiles that track various data points that you may be considering important to you. You can also, if you have a wide variety of third parties, let's say you have hundreds or maybe thousands of third parties, you can filter down and look at subsets using the filtering. We also allow you to tag all of your third parties with an arbitrary number of arbitrary tags, and that effectively lets you build custom filters. I'll point out we can monitor any third party anywhere on the planet. We don't care who they are. We don't care where they are. You do not need to get permission from the third party in order to access their monitoring data. You can tell them if you just want to be nice about it, but you don't have to. We'll get the data on them regardless, okay? So here's all of your high-level data. But let's move on and take a look at something a little bit more granular, and this would be the portfolio view. This shows you all of your vendors listed by name, their risk to you, any cyber threat intelligence data that's active on them, their current score. Now, it's worth emphasizing here, we do not pitch this as a security ratings product, okay? Security ratings, I think most people know by now, have not the best reputation on the planet, and deservedly so, especially if you've ever been the recipient of a security ratings analysis, let's say through your insurance company or something like that. You know those leave a lot to be desired. but people expect and demand a score, and we present one nonetheless. Um, you can set thresholds on all of your third parties and warning conditions. The goal being that you do not have to keep an eyeball on all of your third parties all the time. We don't expect you to log in every single day and look at things all day long. You've got better things to do. Instead, you can set up these warnings and thresholds in the platform, and then the platform will notify you when something needs your attention. Then you can come in and look into it in greater detail. Like in this case, you can see this vendor's score has dropped below a minimum acceptable score. And that way you know, hey, I need to go and take a look at this thing. Something's going on. Of course, you can also look at their compliance level based on whatever compliance framework you've assigned to them. And of course, we helpfully provide a scoring histogram so you can track their performance over time and see, have they been consistently good? Have they been consistently bad? Are they oscillating between the two, etc.? You also have a very, very handy filter here on the portfolio page that gets a lot of work out every single time a new major vulnerability is released. Think Move It or Spring for Shell or Log4j or the Exchange vulnerabilities or SolarWinds, the big hits from the last few years. You want to know immediately, do any of my vendors suffer from these vulnerabilities? Well, we built a filter specifically for that. So you can come through here and pick a specific vulnerability and say, which of my vendors suffer from this, if any? You make it into a filter, turn it on, boom, you immediately know. It's deceptively simple. Okay, a lot of people say it can't work that way. No, it does. That's exactly what we're doing. But let's say you need even more detail on your third parties. Let's say you're continuously monitoring a critical vendor. Let's say you're doing due diligence on a vendor that you're considering signing a contract with. Those are two very common workflows, right? So what you can do is dig into this data and go to what we call the due diligence screen. And this allows you, again, to see their score, the scoring histogram, but now you can dig into the data to whatever depth you want to. So we're going to geolocate all of their assets across the globe. This is a handy way to know, hey, are they potentially keeping my sensitive data in a server somewhere that regulatorily wise, they're not allowed to do? Let's say keeping sensitive data in Russia or China or Syria or something like that. Okay, you need to know if that's going on. So we will let you know that here. Of course, here you'd be able to see all of their assets and their asset scores. Then you can start digging into the more granular data, like on the cyber threat intelligence. Well, have we detected, hey, does this vendor have bad IP reputations? Okay, or let's say instead, do they have malware that's been detected? Or what about vulnerability alerts? Do they have vulnerabilities that are under active exploitation today? Okay, because this data is updated on a daily basis. We know what threat actors are using to do their attack campaigns with, so we correlate that with the vulnerabilities present in the third party. So now you know, hey, these guys have got vulnerabilities that are under active exploitation. It means they're at greater risk than they were otherwise. And you can drill into these vulnerabilities, seeing what vulnerabilities exist. When were they first detected? How long have they been going unremediated? And while on the subject of remediation, vendors don't have to say something's been remediated for it to get marked remediated. In fact, we don't even allow them to do so. Why? Because we're not going to trust them. This is more like an audit than anything else. So we will only mark a vulnerability as remediated when we test it, which also happens continuously, and see that it has been remediated correctly and completely. And then we do a little bit of math to say, hey, when did we first detect this versus when did we detect that it was remediated? And we can calculate the TTR, the time to resolve, for everything. And we keep this data forever, so you can go back in time or check history across all of your vendors and know, hey, how are they keeping up with their infrastructure? Same thing goes for web applications. We're doing extensive tests on all of those. You'll see this little siren symbol here that indicates this particular vulnerability is under active exploitation. And this T indicates, hey, I've assigned a task to my vendor to fix this, because not only can you monitor things, but you can tell your vendors through our platform, hey, you need to fix this. You can put in your notes, you can put in a priority, you can assign a due date, you can assign it to a person at that company, and boom, they get a notification that says exactly what you're asking them to do and who's asking to do it. And all this is logged, so it's all auditable later on. And we go into the same level of detail on the third parties as we do for you, our first party clients. And that is we go all the way down to the port, the protocol, and the asset on everything. We provide all of our evidence indicating why we flagged it. And then we provide helpful links to off-platform references. This data is available to you and the third party simultaneously, okay? Because we're trying to close that loop of, hey, you found something wrong. You need to let the third party know. The third party needs to have the evidence to understand that you're not just blowing smoke. And they need to know how to fix it, which is based on this information down here, okay? So closing that loop. We're also doing email security checks. We're checking all the domains that are MX enabled for this vendor. It's looking for the usual stuff you would expect: SPF, DMARC, DKIM, Open Relay, source of spam, reputational analysis for the domain, all of that kind of stuff that you would normally do. We're also keeping track of their patching cadence because we know what patches they're missing. We know when those vulnerabilities were published. We know when the patches were published. And we know when we detected the vulnerability. So we can derive their patching cadence. We're also watching them and we know when they patch. So we can further refine that number over time. Patching cadence is a very important metric in lots of compliance frameworks. Next is breach history. Now, this is super useful, especially if you're looking into doing business with a new vendor. This is part of a due diligence, is have they ever had any historical data breaches? So what are we doing here? Well, we're going through, and for public companies, we're searching like SEC data and all the other stuff, their own websites and news feeds to see, has there ever been a public breach announced? For private companies, same process, just minus the SEC stuff for obvious reasons, okay? And we'll classify the breaches as either confirmed, meaning we've got enough evidence to say this is a definitive breach and it's unquestionable, or it's alleged, meaning, hey, there's a little bit of data out here indicating something's gone on, but not enough to necessarily say a breach has actually occurred. Think about what happened with Oracle Cloud last year, where everybody knew a breach had happened, but Oracle Cloud was denying it. That would go in the alleged column up until the point where Oracle had to admit to the obvious, which point then the breach became confirmed. We're also checking for dark web records for all of these vendors to see if they've ever leaked any credentials, and if so, when and what kind. And most importantly, we're also checking to see if the vendor has ever exposed any of your credentials. And hopefully this is always going to remain 0 for you. And last but certainly not least, let's get to the star of the show, control and compliance. Now, as I mentioned at the get-go, a lot of people do traditional third-party risk management strictly by questionnaires. The problem with that approach is, one, questionnaires are point in time. So they could be compliant today. Are they compliant 6 months from now? You don't know. Are you going to send them another questionnaire? Maybe. Are they going to fill it out? Probably not. Okay. And if they do fill it out, how can you verify any of the data that they said you is correct? They may provide you all kinds of supporting documentation and evidence, but how do you know that's correct? You don't. You can't until now, because we are able to get all this information on all these third parties and then correlate it. So let's use an example. Let's say one of your control questions is, do you encrypt all data in transit with TLS 1.2 or higher? And let's say traditionally the vendor has always responded and said, yes, I do. And they give you some evidence to that effect, okay? But now you have the benefit of us having all this attack surface information on them. And if we detect that, no, they're actually not using TLS 1.2 or higher on everything. They've got some old TLS 1.0 hanging around. We're going to point that out. And now you have a data point that you can take up with your vendor and say, well, you told me this, but the evidence says that. Care to square this circle, Mr. Vendor? Because that's an important conversation you need to be able to have, and we enable you to do it. Now, another thing is, let's say you are going to issue a SOC 2 to a vendor, or a high trust, or a HECVAT, or whatever, okay? And the vendor, instead of responding and filling out a questionnaire, they say, oh, we've already got that. Here, I'm going to hand you my SOC 2 in PDF format, or Excel, or Doc, or whatever, okay? Well, what do you do with it? Well, traditionally, you've got to go and manually read it and go through it. And our analysis indicates that on average, it takes about 6 to 8 hours of your time per vendor to go through and accurately analyze something like a SOC 2. We said that's kind of excessive, especially if you got a lot of vendors. How are you going to do that? How can we make this easier? So that's why we built the AI Auditor. So what it will do is you can take any of those documents provided by those third-party vendors and analyze them. And you just drag and drop them in here, and the AI will go through it in about 15 minutes. And this is the result. So in this particular case, this vendor has provided a SOC 2. Let's take a look and see what it shows you. Well, it's going to go through, and it's essentially going to summarize and red flag it for you, all right, against the SOC 2 standard. So it's going to give you the overall summary here on the number of controls passed, partials, and failed out of the total number of controls, overall compliance levels here. Then it's going to break it down to controlled by coverage group. And that way you can easily spot, hey, they're really weak here, but not so bad over there, and make your judgment accordingly. And if you ever need to, you can drill into the individual questions and data for every single control principle. And we're going to show you the full analysis. So for example, restate the control principle. Then we're going to show you the AI analysis on it. What did it determine based on this? And then it's going to say the control status. In this case, they failed to provide required documentation. And the result is they failed the control. Now, of course, you can override the AI if you need to, but the AI is also going to go through and it's going to cite the portion that it used to make its decision. That way you immediately know this is the data point that was analyzed and why. So again, you can use that to guide your interpretation of what's going on. But in this case, they're saying documentation was required but not provided. So you may want to issue a task to your vendor saying, please provide me with this documentation. So we helpfully provide you with the dialog box to create a task right here saying, give me the docs. I want this with an urgent priority. I'm going to assign it to Joe Schmo, and you better get it to me by, end of week. Create task, done. Okay. And then when they provide the documentation, you rerun the analysis. Now they pass the control. Simple as that. Okay. So again, trying to automate and streamline a process that's traditionally taking you many, many hours per vendor and condensing it into something that you don't have to do anything, so wait for about 15 minutes, and then you're going to know.
I'll just jump in real quick, Eric, while you're there. We've had a few clients beta this over the past quarter and a half, and we've gotten to a point where we have a few anecdotes, and one we turned into a recent case study. I'm just going to drop that link into the chat. You guys can reference it, click it, and you can reference it after the webinar. But again, going from multiple hours for one vendor for one analyst, down to minutes, depending on the totality of the package they get from the vendor, has really started to streamline and make vendor review a lot more efficient for organizations. So I just wanted to put that in. I'll put that resource in there. Can the
Perfect.
AI SOC review be customized? Good question. That's a question that just came in, Eric.
Yeah, I'd have to get a little more detail about what you mean by customized. Maybe we can take that up offline. But we allow you to do custom questionnaires. I don't know if that's the direction you're going in there, but if I get the impression you're probably trying to say, well, I want to use different standards maybe to analyze their SOC 2 than the boilerplate. But I think that's a conversation I need to get more detail on before I can answer it definitively. And I'd be happy to set that up. Give your contact information to Marshall, and we can take care of that. I do want to point out another little party trick that we have here with this analysis module. And let's say, for example, a vendor's provided you with a SOC 2, and you needed a SOC 2, so that's great. But you also need a PCI, and they didn't provide you one. Now, under normal circumstances, you'd issue them a PCI, and maybe again, they'd fill it out in their own sweet time. Okay. Or what you can actually do is you can tell the AI auditor to use the SOC 2 as a data source for PCI analysis. All right. So what you're doing is it will take whatever evidence it can find that would satisfy portions of the PCI and tell you where it can say, yes, what they said in the SOC 2 also covers this part of the PCI, which means this control would be passed, or this one's partial, or this one's failed. Now, obviously, the overlap is not always going to be 100% because different frameworks cover different things. So there may be certain where it says, I don't have enough evidence either way. But the advantage here is now you can potentially drastically cut down the number of questions the vendor needs to answer in that PCI if they've already provided a SOC 2. And likewise, once they provide a SOC 2 and a PCI and you need a high trust, well, again, now we've got the totality of all those other two questionnaires to draw from. You can see how you can leverage this to get more mileage out of whatever documentation you already have on hand. Okay. Speaking of questionnaires, you can issue an unlimited number of questionnaires to any vendor at any time. But that can result in potentially you having a lot of questionnaires in flight at any given time, especially if you've got a lot of vendors. So we helpfully provide you with this status page right here, which shows you every single questionnaire that you have in flight. Who's the vendor? What's the questionnaire? What's the current status of it? Okay, well, the vendor's onboarded, but they haven't started answering the questionnaire yet. Or maybe they've started answering the questionnaire and have finished it. And now they've said they're awaiting you to accept the questionnaire. And you can see the date that the last status change occurred, who the assessor is that you've assigned, so much of your organization who's going to be looking it over. And of course, at any given time, you can alter all of this stuff and say, well, no, Tony's on vacation. I need Kate to look at it instead. And hey, my contact, they left the company and I need to reassign this to someone else at the vendor. You can do that too. Plus, vendors can also delegate within their own structure. You don't have to micromanage it. So if you assign it to John, and John can only answer a third of it, but he needs Jane and Joe to also participate, the vendor can bring Jane and Joe into the picture without having to bother you and get that questionnaire completed. Okay, so and they can do this at the questionnaire level, they can do it at the group level, they can do it at the individual question level. It does not matter. Okay. However, they need to do it to get it done. Let's see, Marshall. Let's see. You wanted to talk a little bit about the reporting side of the house.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The TPRM reports and the comparison.
Yeah. So, and I want to be cognizant of my time here. So on the third-party reports, of course, we've got a lot of reports in here from the mild to the wild. Like one of my favorites is the executive summary report. So let's come in here and take a look at that. And again, in the executive summary report, what you're expecting is a fairly concise report, doesn't go into excruciating detail, but it hits all the critical data points that you're concerned about or that your board is concerned about. So what are we going to cover? Well, there's their score. Then we're going to be checking the score trend along with an analysis on that. Score change summary. Well, their most recent score change, was it up? Was it down? What happened? Where? Why? Of course, you got all that data here. Then the various risk categories. Where are all their risks? Recommendations. This is stuff that you can put in on your own. So you can customize these reports to say specific things. And then critical data points like total number of open vulnerabilities over a given time period, broken down by criticals, highs, moderates, and lows. How many of those are net new vulnerabilities? And what kind of remediations have they been performing over that same time frame? Very critical data to see how are they keeping up with their cybersecurity hygiene. Then out of all the vulnerabilities and risks associated, well, what are the risk scenarios that are most concerning? Information system compromise, unauthorized marketing material disclosures. Or how about this? Next, we're going to go and highlight their vulnerabilities that are under active exploitation or associated with active ransomware campaigns. Again, these are all top of mind things that you want to know, clearly and concisely communicated in a single report. Or you can go the complete opposite direction and say, I want a detailed summary report. This is what I call the kitchen sink report, where it's everything on everything, the most excruciating detail you can imagine. And these reports can run into the hundreds of pages in length. But again, if you need this level of detail, it's all in here. In this case, you can see it even includes the compliance information. So a questionnaire has been assigned, looks like a PCI has been assigned here, and you see the information that's contained in will. So this is all the detail about everything. And then, of course, we've got several reports that are in between that. Or let's say you've got another situation. Let's say you've got a bevy of third parties, and you want to know how they all compare to one another. Well, that's why we built the third-party comparison report. So you can come in here and say, I want to add certain companies like Stark Industries and Tyrell Corp and Vault Tech. All right. How do they all compare against one another? Well, let's go and see. This will take a little bit for it to generate because it's going and grabbing all the data on all of those third parties. But again, now you'll be able to see how they all compare, total number of vulnerabilities and classifications. And in this case, I know why. It's because the demo doesn't have the historical. But it would have all of your line graphs here showing their performance over time so you can compare them over time. And then breaking down their vulnerabilities and so forth and so on. Again, I apologize. This is on demo data, so it doesn't have the history on it. But you can kind of understand what it would look like of seeing those lines over time. And then the other various reports. You're not limited to these reports as well. We offer a full API for the platform. It's free, comes with it. So you can pull the raw data and then fold, spindle, and mutilate it however you want in anything you have. Think Power BI, think Tableau, any kind of analysis tool that you want, or maybe make a custom dashboard based on that. We have clients who are doing that as well. So you've got all this data at your fingertips and able to do whatever you want to with it. All right, so let's talk about a common scenario. You have some of your infrastructure up in Amazon AWS. You may think, well, fine, I want to put in AWS as a vendor because I want to monitor them. Well, you do that, we'll certainly give you that data. But the problem is you're going to be analyzing AWS as a whole. And right now we're tracking close to 1 million assets in AWS. Well, not all of those are AWS. Some of those are going to be customer assets instead. And there's no way to distinguish between the two. So you may end up with a picture of AWS that could be a little confusing because, again, it's going to contain some stuff that's relevant and some stuff that's irrelevant. So how do you fix that? Well, pretty simple. You can do an in-scope analysis. So you can say, well, out of the 750,000 assets that are in AWS, I'm only concerned with these. Okay, you just pick and choose. And you can do a search and sort and everything like that to help you find those things. We're also working on a way to automatically detect the ones that should be relevant to you based on your technology stack and your DNS record analysis and your external attack surface analysis. That's coming, okay? But that being said, for now, you can go through and select the ones that are relevant to you, and then we will generate a separate new in-scope score in addition to the overall company score. And now you can compare and contrast the two and say, well, yeah, the overall score may look like this, but for the things that I'm concerned about, it looks very different, for example. You also have a document repository. You can put anything you want to in here. You can put in contracts, network diagrams, firewall configurations, attestations, you name it, doesn't matter. This is a catch-all. You can put anything you want to in here.
Yep.
What else, Marshall?
Real quick, can you go back to control and compliance and an issued questionnaire, and we can just talk a bit briefly about some forthcoming features. So if you do like a view analysis or do assess manually. So what we're also what we've heard from clients and what will be coming out in the next 4 to 6 weeks is kind of a reminder as a service or an AI workflow automation where once you issue a questionnaire, right, the system will go ahead and take care of the reminders to the contact at the vendor that, hey, I'm still haven't seen you start the questionnaire, or you've paused it and I'd like you to finish it, or I need to get evidence from you. That is coming out in a new feature released in 4 to 6 weeks around helping automate the workflows about getting information from the vendors and fulfilling it back into the questionnaire, back into their profile, so that you can make that decision. Again, it reduces some of the administrative burden off of the TPRM analysts at organizations.
Yeah, we're going to call it NAAS, nagging as a service. But yes, that's precisely what it will do. And this has been based on, again, client feedback and saying, hey, a big problem with my TPRM is getting vendors to do what I'm asking them to do in the first place, and constantly following up on them and keeping track of, okay, well, why is this guy not responded? Do I need to ping him again? That's something we can automate, and we are.
Yep.
So you'll be able to do things like exactly what Marshall described, and you'll be able to provide a due date for your questionnaires, for example.
Yeah, and I do believe it takes into account if additional parties have to be included on the vendor side. It takes that into account and accommodates for that as part of the fulfillment.
Oh, there's something else here I didn't mention, and I want to bring it up. It's not related to the controls and compliance stuff, but one of the interesting things we have here is not only can we spot, well, first off, we can automatically detect who a lot of your vendors are. That can solve a lot of problems right there, especially when we frequently find that you have more vendors than you think you have. Because we're going to analyze your technology stack and all your relationships that you have that are externally visible, and there's a lot of them. And we can spot, for example, if we see you've got an asset and its IP range is one that belongs to AWS, I know you're hosting in AWS. Therefore, we know you have a relationship with AWS. Therefore, we know that's a third party, and we can make that relationship apparent and give you the option to monitor them. But we're also doing the same thing for your technology stack. But we do the same analysis on vendors. So now we can do fourth party impact. which means we'll be able to say, hey, your fourth party, Wayland Yutani, not only they have relationships with these vendors. So now you can do a fourth party commonality of vendor. Let's say you don't have any reliance on AWS East, but if 80% of your vendors do, then the outage that AWS East had last year is probably of some concern to you, and you need to know that. So again, we're providing all this information so that you know those relationships exist beyond just your vendor. Now your vendors' vendors. And if you really want to go crazy with it, your vendors. All right, so I think we're about out of time, aren't we, Marshall?
Thanks for your attendance. Thanks for your time. We'll see you again in the future.